If you were ready to put up your feet, eat your mince pies, drink your mulled wine and forget about property, well, stop right there. There's loads going on. In this market update, we're going to tell you about falls of over 52% in property transactions, news of rents shooting up, and some potentially devastating news for landlords in Wales.
Welcome to the Property Podcast, where every Thursday morning, property investors come to be informed and inspired. There's so much you need to know about this month, both to help you operate at a more strategic level with your investments, but there are some specific rules and changes you need to be aware of as well. And make sure you stick around to the end for Hub Extra, where we've got a recommendation that will sort out much of your Christmas viewing for you. Time then for our market update. And you may think that things could be winding down a little bit towards the end of the year, but no, there's actually been absolutely loads going on in the property market over the last month. And we're about to round all of it up for you right now. We're going to cover some rules changes you need to know about. We're going to talk cladding. We're going to have some really interesting developments in mortgages. But as always, Rob, we're going to start with the big picture and talk about sales and rents. And Rob, terrifying headline here. UK house sales fall 52% in a month. What's gone on?
That's eye-catching, isn't it, that headline? Well, let's start off with something that's quite remarkable for a news story. The headline is actually true. Activity has fallen by 52%. So transactions across the UK, that's property transactions, so properties being sold, slumped by 52% in a month to reach 76,000 in October after thousands of home buyers rushed to complete their purchases and beat the government's end of stamp duty holiday deadline, reports The Guardian. Now, that is a huge drop, but remember, there was a surge leading up to the deadline. So what's interesting is actually looking at the number compared to last year, because that is more reliable data. How does it compare to last October? Well, actually, it was still 28% lower than the same month last year. So it is a significant fall, although there was a lot of activity leading up to the deadline. Rob, this is going to be interesting to follow because is this a one-off? Is it, a mini trend and then the market surges back on again? Or is it a slowing down of the market?
Well, I hope you don't expect me to answer that question right now because I don't know, but it's certainly something to keep an eye on. The next couple of months will be a bit funny anyway because of the time of year. But as we move into January, it'll be interesting to start looking at some of the more leading indicators of activity rather than, of course, actual transactions that have completed, which is a lagging indicator, to start to get a sense of if we're going to get the New Year bounce that you often see in the market. So that's the sales market. The rental market is struggling if you are a tenant, in that there is apparently not a lot of rental stock out there. There's a story from The Times with research showing that of all the properties that are listed on the major portals Rightmove and Zoopla, 82% of them are properties for sale and only 18% are properties to rent. That pattern is particularly pronounced in more scenic areas. So in Cornwall, only 5% of properties listed are for rent, and on the Isle of Wight, it's only 4%. And the article also talks about how landlords have been tempted to switch from long-term letting to short-let platforms like Airbnb because so many people are now holidaying in the UK. Which I think is interesting because this is, of course, the exact reversal of the pattern we saw about a year and a half ago, where suddenly the rental market was flooded because people were moving away from these platforms. So when you've got a lack of rental stock, what do you expect to happen? You expect rental prices to go up. And Rob, that is exactly what's happening, according to our next story.
Yes, in The Guardian again, they obviously love property. The article reports that data from Zoopla shows that rents are up in the UK when excluding London 6%. A figure that Zoopla says is a 14-year high. So rents up 6%. And based on the last story, there's no surprise at all. And where are the rents going up the highest at the moment? Well, it's one of those scenic areas that people like to holiday, Dorset. So Dorset is up 16%, and that will be a supply and demand play. That's what's driving that number there so strongly. It's interesting because, as you will know, listening to the Property Podcast, you would have felt this yourself, whether you aspire to be a property investor or you are one already, that landlords, investors often get attacked by all sides. And, if you say you're a property investor, if you're not talking to someone else who likes property investment, they'll probably have a negative view of what you're doing. Sad but true. What you are doing is providing homes. And I'm sure the vast majority of people listening to this want to provide or do provide really good quality homes. And that helps the rental market because without private landlords, there isn't a rental market. And the government really should acknowledge that. And at some point, they might have to if this trend continues, because their support for the rental market, the people providing that rental stock, I should say, isn't really there. And in fact, it's probably been hindered, if anything. So these numbers do not come as a surprise whatsoever based on what we've been seeing. And there'll be no surprise to see price increases carry on and that trend continue for the foreseeable future.
Let's move on to talking a little bit about rents specifically in city centres, because we talked about a kind of COVID pattern that was reversing, which was the move from Airbnb into long-term rentals. And now back again, we're seeing the same thing with city centres. No surprising to listeners of the Property Podcast, because we said that this would happen months ago. Had to get that in there. But all the data is showing that rents in city centres are not just recovering, but they're outpacing rents elsewhere. London, of course, has particularly struggled over the last couple of years. It was struggling even before COVID. But some research from Knight Frank shows that prime central London is growing faster than it has done for years. And this is relevant because prime central London tends to be a kind of leading indicator of what the market's going to do. If prices are falling there, it often means falls are coming elsewhere because of the ripple effect and vice versa. But rents in prime central London have grown by 4.2% over the last 3 months. So still not as high as the UK average if you exclude London, but on the up. And they put this down to the return to offices and more international travel and general easing of restrictions. Savills also have put out a piece of research talking about cities more broadly, saying as people return to the cities, we expect a strong recovery in rental values. And they say that they predict that rents in London and other cities will continue to recover throughout next year. Now, I've had some less than flattering things to say about Savills' predictions in the past, but this one aligns with what we've been saying for a while now. So, of course, I'm going to agree with this.
Of course, we're going to agree with that, Rob. What we don't agree with, though, is the next story, which is from The Telegraph, which says landlords face punishing new costs under property wealth tax plan. And this is worrying news for second home owners or people who have buy-to-lets in Wales, because this has been endorsed by all sides of the Welsh government, which sees plans for rent controls and a shake-up of council tax to become a new wealth tax for people who have second homes in Wales. Now, this goes against exactly what we were talking about just a few minutes ago, whereas that if you keep punishing people who bring private homes to the rental sector, they will disappear and they'll find new ways to invest. And you can quite easily see if this is pushed through and the measures are as harsh as the article suggests, that those investors in Wales will just look over the board into England. And you could say, well, the measures may go there, maybe, but maybe not. And where does that leave the Welsh rental market? Well, not in a good place. So I understand the desire to do what they want to do, make sure rents are at a sensible level. I get that. And there are issues in Wales with second homes, particularly just used as second homes, not buy-to-lets. And I've seen protests in Wales where people are upset that their local communities have been severely affected by people just buying second homes and just using them occasionally. Absolutely understand why you want to clamp down on that. But providing rental stock for the people of Wales is a good thing to do. And as we've already seen, if you take away rental stock, then you have bigger issues. Now, let's see if this plays out and let's see what happens in the end. But this does smack of good intentions poorly thought through for me.
I agree. If you are a landlord in Wales, I'd say at the moment, certainly don't panic about this because this is a very long way from actually happening. This is just a statement of intention at the moment between a couple of political parties. Doesn't mean it's anywhere near happening. A similar statement was made about 6 months ago in Scotland between two political parties. So if you are looking for an indicator of whether this is going to end up happening in Wales or if it will get watered down or forgotten about entirely or whatever, then keeping an eye on what's going on in Scotland might not be a bad idea.
Politicians, Rob, have been known to talk about stuff and not follow through on it once or twice before. So, yeah, maybe this isn't one to lose sleep on just yet.
Well, let's move on to mortgages now, because there's a couple of really interesting stories that have caught our eye here. And the first one has got an eye-catching headline: Bank of England considering easing mortgage rules in a move that could boost house prices. Now, Rob, this story reflects almost exactly something that you've said for a long time, which is basically that rules get brought in after some kind of dramatic event has happened, but then as time goes on, they get forgotten about and loosened, and they all seem like a bit of a pain because times are good, and that, of course, allows exactly the same thing to happen again. The story here is about a set of rules that were brought in after the last financial crash. which means that banks are limited to the number of large mortgages they can dish out. And large mortgages is defined as people borrowing more than 4.5 times their salary, and they can only exceed that limit for 15% of their new loans. That seemed like a great idea at the time. Seems like less of a good idea now because banks want to do more lending. And in an update last month, the Bank of England referenced the possibility of relaxing these rules because there don't seem to be any danger signs in terms of highly indebted households at the moment. So, Rob, we've talked about a property boom coming. Chalk this up as another indicator for me.
It is. It wasn't hard to predict this would happen because it's human nature. This is just what we do. We forget the lessons, the pain diminishes, and then we start to convince ourselves that it's okay now. And to be clear, what they're suggesting isn't anywhere near as reckless as what happened last time, but it's a move. And it's a move away from what they've done before. But because banks want it now, the Bank of England is considering easing it. You could argue, why have the regulations at all? Because after the crash, the banks didn't need this regulation. They were all scared. They weren't going to do a reckless lending anyway because they had no money. They were worried about liquidity and worried about what the future held. They didn't want to do much in the way of lending, and they didn't. And now the market is moving up again. The Bank of England wants to accommodate those banks who now have an appetite for lending and say, okay, let's make it a bit easier. So, call me a little cynical, but I question the point in regulation altogether if you're just going to move it as soon as the demand is back. Because up until now, banks haven't wanted to do anything, and as soon as they want to do more, the Bank of England is looking at accommodating it. Let's see if this is just one step and that's it. But as we suspect, it's probably just the first step amongst many steps in that direction. Time will tell.
It will. The other interesting story in the realm of mortgages is that a lender has launched a new product where you can fix your mortgage rate for up to 40 years. Now, there's already one lender in the market offering fixes up to 40 years. That was introduced earlier this year. This is now a second. It'll be very interesting to see if others follow. So as a homeowner, at 95% loan to value, you can fix for 30 years at 3.77%, which is not bad if you ask me. I mean, it's obviously a lot higher than you could get if you're going for a shorter term fix. But bearing in mind there are no costs associated with changing every few years, and you've got certainty of your payments for probably as long as you're going to stay in that home, that's not bad at all. And there's no early redemption fees. So it's interesting to see products going in this direction. In the US, it's very common to be able to fix for 30 plus years. But this is a new development in the UK. It'll be interesting to see if this continues. Also, the funding source for this product is a pension company. Pension companies, of course, are most interested in having certainty of repayments over a long period of time, which kind of sounds like a natural fit for mortgage lending. So will we see similar products backed by similar funding? Don't know, we'll have to wait and see. But whether a product like that is right for you or not, having more choice in the mortgage market so everyone can choose the right option for them can only be a good thing.
Moving on now, cladding is an issue that's impacting a lot of investors at the moment. And potential good news, according to the iNews website, which has a headline that reads, "Cladding Scandal, How Plans to Make Flat Leaseholders Pay for Repairs Have Been Put on Hold." And this story has been generated by comments from Michael Gove, who said that there's going to be a pause on leaseholders paying to remove cladding to make their buildings safe. The Home Secretary has said that he wants to review plans for a loan system for leaseholders to repay the costs for redemption work. So there's a loan system in place, but he wants to pause on that while they have to think about, is there a better way? And should the leaseholders be paying at all? Not a lot more detail yet, and we will keep you updated. But the fact that these noises are being made by the government has to be seen as a positive thing.
Yeah, everything that's happened with cladding over recent years has just been such a mess. Feels like it's not been handled particularly well. I can barely follow all the different statements that are made by various people at various times, and it really just needs some certainty for all involved. And hopefully this latest pause and then reassessment will give an opportunity for that to happen, but we will see. There's also a story in the Financial Times about the Bank of England getting concerned about this. Now, of course, the reason that they're getting concerned about it is that mortgage lenders have lots of loans against buildings that are affected by cladding. And many of those buildings are at the moment impossible to value because they're effectively unmortgageable until problems get rectified. And when the bills do start coming in for these issues to be rectified, it's not known if leaseholders are going to be forced into financial difficulties as a result of paying for them and therefore potentially default on their mortgages. So from all angles, there is a need to kind of really grip this issue and finally come to a decision and do something about it and have a clear set of rules in place. Hopefully that's going to start happening. We'll see.
Next up, a story from Landlord Today with possibly another worrying headline. I mean, headlines in general try and do that, don't they? Get you worried and make you read. Legal warning. Some buy-to-lets will never meet new EPC targets. And this is around the news that EPC targets are changing for buy-to-let properties in the UK. And since April last year, landlords can no longer let a property with an EPC rating of F or G unless they have a valid exemption in place. And the government's planning to raise that minimum to a rating of C by 2028. And that's for all buy-to-lets. And then all homes by 2035. And that move to a C rating potentially impacts a lot of people, Rob.
Over 2 million properties, apparently. And that, for me, is why this is not going to happen. So at the moment, this is just a proposal. And having proposals around energy efficiency sounds good. It's a good thing to announce, and everyone gets to feel very happy about things moving in the right direction. But say there's 2 million properties that need some kind of work done to bring them up to a C. Well, that is a huge amount of properties to bring up to that standard in a short amount of time at huge cost. But like you mentioned, there's lots of properties that will never reach that standard without effectively being rebuilt. And there are also, of course, blocks of flats where individual owners may not be able to do whatever needs to be done. So it needs to be done at building level, which is going to come with great expense and complications. So say that just a quarter of those properties can't be brought up to the standard in time. Are you really going to allow 500,000 rental properties to just drop out of the market all at the same time? No, it's not going to happen. So either this will get forgotten about, or they'll redefine the measurement to make it easier to achieve a C, or what I think will actually happen is exemptions. So if you can demonstrate that it would be impossible or not cost effective to bring your property up to that standard, you won't have to do it. I'm pretty confident about this one. I think this is another of those scary headlines that's going to come to nothing. But if I'm wrong about it, well, we're not going to find out till 2028. So I'm quite comfortable saying it today.
Another story from Landlord Today is carbon monoxide alarms must be fitted in all private rental homes with gas boilers. To be honest, this one surprised me because I just assumed that was the case already. And I don't think many landlords are going to be concerned with the fact that they have to do this. But it's just another thing that you have to do out of a long list of things you have to do if you are a landlord. So we're just making you aware that that regulation has changed. And now it's not something you probably should do because it's a pretty good thing to do, but something you actually now must do. So the regulation isn't in place just yet, but it looks like it will be soon. So we'll keep you updated when that happens. But just want to note that if you don't have carbon monoxide alarms in your home, if you have a gas boiler, you'll need to do that soon.
And for our final story today, you just mentioned, Rob, another piece of regulation. There are so many regulations in place. And there are, of course, the majority of good landlords, but there are some terrible landlords and some outright criminal landlords as well. So given all these dodgy elements and all these rules in place, there must be a fair amount of enforcement going on. Well, maybe not. According to some research by the National Residential Landlords Association, 67% of local authorities have prosecuted 0 landlords relating to standards on the management of private rented housing over the last 3 years. 2/3, 0 prosecutions, and a further 10% of local authorities managed to prosecute 1. So that's not spectacular. They also say that just 20 local authorities were responsible for 77% of all prosecutions. So basically most councils are doing nothing and a small number are really going for it. Out of the 3 who've got the highest number of prosecutions, 2 of those don't have a landlord licensing scheme in place. So they're using this to demonstrate that landlord licensing schemes seem not to be achieving what they supposedly are there to achieve. But in any case, not a great record on enforcement action because, hey, of course, it's a lot easier to announce new rules than it is to enforce the ones you've already got.
Time for Hub Extra now, and I'm really, really excited by this one. Full disclosure, I've not watched what we're about to recommend. So what we're recommending is a Beatles documentary called Get Back, but producer Dan had us a bit late recording a podcast this morning because he was enthusiastically telling us about this new documentary put together by Peter Jackson, famous for being a director. You probably know him from Lord of the Rings. He has, it seemingly painstakingly put together a mammoth documentary over 3 parts, for 3 hours each part, of the making of the Let It Be album. And based on what Dan was telling me, I wanted the down tools. I'm going to watch it straight away. It sounds incredible. How do you access it? Well, you can get it on Disney Plus. Disney Plus itself is worthy of a Hub Extra mention. We possibly might have mentioned it in the past, but it is great, Disney Plus. It's not just Disney films, which for me would be worth the money in itself, but you also get all the Marvel stuff, the Star Wars stuff, and they've got the Star Network on there and the Fox Network, so you get things like The Simpsons on there as well. So much for your money. Highly, highly recommend looking at Disney Plus. But if you're a Beatles fan, it might be worth the subscription just for this. I mean, being from Liverpool, I think it's mandatory that I absolutely love the Beatles and football. It seems that they're the two things that you are born with a love for, or made to love anyway. And I certainly do love both. And this Beatles documentary has got me very excited. So based on Dan's recommendation and the reviews across the board for this documentary, it's going to get a recommendation before we've even had the chance to watch it.
Well, consider yourself updated. That's what's been going on in the property market over the last month, and it's been a lot, hasn't it? Now, there may only be a month of 2021 left, but there's still plenty of podcast goodness to fit in. We're not going anywhere, and we've got some brilliant episodes coming up. So make sure you keep listening to the Property Podcast. And there's an extra special one coming up on Tuesday as well for Ask from Rob. So make sure you don't miss that one. Until then, thank you for listening. Have a wonderful week, and we'll see you soon. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.